Predetermined, the sun was setting over Riverdale, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple as Sheriff James Cooper finished his evening patrol. He drove slowly down Main Street, nodding at folks who waved from the sidewalk. After 15 years wearing the badge in this town, almost everyone knew him and he knew them right back. James wasn't born here, but Riverdale had become home. The kind of place where people left their doors unlocked at night and brought casseroles when someone got sick. At least that's what James wanted to believe. The truth had more shadows than he cared to admit, even to himself. The police radio crackled. "Sheriff, you there?" It was Donna from dispatch. "Go ahead, Donna," he replied, turning down the country music that had been keeping him company. "Just wanted to remind you about Rose's science fair tomorrow. You said you needed a heads up so you wouldn't schedule anything." James smiled. His daughter was always on Donna's mind, just like she was on his. "Thanks for remembering. Wouldn't miss it for the world." Rose Cooper was 17, smart as a whip with a quiet kind of confidence that reminded James of her mother. Since Linda passed from cancer 5 years back, it had been just the two of them. Rose had her mother's warm brown eyes and the same way of looking at a problem from all angles before diving in to fix it. She wanted to be a doctor someday. Had the grades for it too. She's got her mama's brains and her daddy's stubbornness, James often told people, his chest puffing with pride. He pulled into the station parking lot, noticing Deputy Frank Mercer's truck still there, even though his shift had ended an hour ago. Inside, Frank was leaning against the coffee machine, talking with Deputy Scott. "Dawson." They went quiet when James walked in. "Evening, boys," James said, hanging his hat on the rack. "Everything quiet?" "Quiet as a church mouse, Sheriff," Dawson replied with that thin smile of his. "Just finishing up some paperwork." James nodded, though he doubted that's what they were doing. Those two spent more time complaining than working most days. Still, they'd been with the department for years, and James believed in giving his people room to do their jobs. Maybe that was his first mistake. "Did you hear about the new doctor over at Riverdale General?" Mercer asked, pouring himself another cup of coffee. "Some hotshot from Chicago. Been here 2 weeks and already acting like he owns the place." "Dr. Washington?" James asked. "Rose mentioned him. Says the hospital's lucky to have someone with his experience." Mercer and Dawson exchanged looks that James pretended not to see. "I'm sure he's qualified on paper," Dawson said, emphasizing the last word. "But does he really fit in here? This isn't Chicago." James felt the familiar discomfort creep up his spine. He'd heard comments like this before from these two, always, just vague enough that calling them out would make him seem like he was overreacting. He chose his next words carefully. "Dr. Washington's got credentials that would impress anyone. Trauma specialist. Saved more lives than we can count. I'd say that fits in just fine anywhere." Neither deputy responded directly to that. Mercer just shrugged and changed the subject to the weekend fishing forecast. James finished up his paperwork and headed home, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling those comments left him with. He'd seen the new doctor once when dropping off reports at the hospital, a tall, dignified man with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Dr. Elijah Washington had moved to Riverdale because, as he put it, good medicine shouldn't only happen in big cities. James had liked him immediately. The lights were on at home when James pulled into the driveway of their modest 2-story house at the end of Oak Lane. Through the window, he could see Rose at the kitchen table, surrounded by poster boards and colored markers for her science project. His heart warmed at the sight. "How's it coming along?" he asked, hanging his gun belt on the hook by the door, a habit Rose had insisted on since she was little. "Almost done," Rose replied without looking up, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. "I'm showing how different antibiotics affect bacterial growth. Dr. Washington helped me design the experiment when I volunteered at the hospital last weekend." James grabbed a soda from the fridge and sat across from her. "You're spending a lot of time at that hospital lately." "That's where the medicine happens, Dad," she said, finally looking up with a grin. "Dr. Washington says I've got good instincts. He thinks I could get a scholarship to med school if I keep my grades up." "Does he now?" James felt a surge of pride, mixed with something else he couldn't quite name. Was it worry? The town had changed over the years, but not everyone's thinking had kept pace. He seems like a good man. He's amazing, Rose said, her eyes lighting up. Yesterday, a truck driver came in after an accident on the highway. His heart stopped twice, and Dr. Washington brought him back both times. The nurses say no other doctor could have saved him. James nodded, watching his daughter's animated face. She'd found something that sparked her passion, and he wouldn't dream of dimming that light. But he'd been sheriff long enough to know that not everyone in town would be happy about Rose looking up to Dr. Washington. The next morning, Rose's science project won first place. James sat in the back of the school auditorium, clapping until his hands hurt as she accepted the blue ribbon. Her experiment on antibiotic resistance had impressed the judges, especially Dr. Miller from the community college, who kept saying words like methodology and innovative approach that made James beam, even though he barely understood them. After the ceremony, several parents congratulated him. Mrs. Chen from the grocery store hugged Rose and insisted they come by for celebratory ice cream later. Mr. Patterson, who coached the baseball team, shook James's hand and said college scholarships would be fighting over Rose soon enough. But not everyone seemed pleased. James noticed Frank Mercer's wife, Judy, whispering to another woman and glancing at Rose with narrowed eyes. When she saw James looking, she gave a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Quite an achievement," she said, walking over. "Though I hear Dr. Washington had quite a hand in it. Beth at the hospital says Rose has been following him around like a puppy." "She's interested in medicine," James replied evenly. "The doctor's been kind enough to mentor her." Was all Judy said, but her expression spoke volumes. "Well, I'm sure there are plenty of doctors who could give her guidance. Dr. Parker's been here for 30 years after all." James felt his jaw tighten. "Dr. Parker's a pediatrician. Rose is interested in emergency medicine." "I see," Judy said, in a tone that suggested she saw more than James was comfortable with. "Well, you know best, I'm sure. You coming to the department barbecue Sunday?" "Wouldn't miss it," James answered, though suddenly he wasn't looking forward to it. Later that evening, as they walked home with Rose's blue ribbon and a gallon of Celebration ice cream from the Chen family store, James found himself looking at his town differently. The same streets he patrolled daily now seemed lined with shadows he'd been ignoring. How many times had he let comments slide? How many times had he told himself that people just needed time to adjust to newcomers? "Dad? You okay?" Rose asked, nudging him with her elbow. "You've got your worry face on." James forced a smile. "Just thinking about how proud your mom would be today. She always said you were destined for big things." Rose's eyes softened. "I was thinking about her too. Do you think she would have liked Dr. Washington? Your mother judged people by their actions, not where they came from or what they looked like," James said. "So yes, I think she would have approved of anyone who encourages her daughter the way he does." That night, after Rose went to bed, James sat on the porch swing listening to the crickets and thinking about the undercurrents in his department. The jokes that weren't really jokes. The assignments that somehow always sent Mercer and Dawson to the white neighborhoods while officers Liu and Hernandez got sent to the other side of the tracks. The way some folks got warnings while others got tickets for the same offenses. James had told himself he was being fair by treating everyone on his force the same, giving them the benefit of the doubt. But maybe that wasn't fairness at all. Maybe he'd been closing his eyes to things he should have seen clearly. His phone buzzed with a text from Donna. "Reminder, Dr. Washington speaking at town council tomorrow about hospital funding. You said you wanted to attend." James typed back a quick thanks. He hadn't actually planned to go, but now he thought it might be important to show support. If not for Dr. Washington himself, then for what he represented, the kind of change Riverdale needed, whether it knew it or not. He looked up at the stars, bright in the clear night sky, and made a silent promise to do better. To see more clearly. To speak up more often. He couldn't know then how soon that promise would be tested, or how high the stakes would become. In just 3 days' time, everything he thought he knew about his town his department, and himself would be turned upside down, leaving nothing untouched, least of all his heart, to address however long and difficult that process might be. The rain started just after noon, a light drizzle at first that quickly turned into sheets of water pounding against the windows of Riverdale High School. By the time the final bell rang at 3:15, the storm had transformed the streets into small rivers and turned the sky an ominous dark gray. Rose Cooper stood under the overhang by the school entrance, watching the downpour while clutching her debate team folder to her chest. She'd stayed late to work on arguments for the upcoming regional competition, and now she was regretting not having asked her dad for a ride. The weather forecast had mentioned only a chance of light rain. Nothing like this angry storm that had rolled in without warning. Need a lift? Her debate coach, Mrs. Rivera, asked as she locked the classroom door. Rose shook her head. Thanks, but I've got my car. Just trying to time my dash to avoid getting completely soaked. Drive carefully, Mrs. Rivera warned. The highway gets slick fast in weather like this. Rose nodded, though she was only half listening. She was mentally reviewing the notes she'd been working on about healthcare access in rural communities. Dr. Washington had given her some research papers on the topic when she'd mentioned the debate, and she was eager to incorporate his insights. Taking a deep breath, she made a run for her car, an old blue Honda that had once belonged to her mother. By the time she unlocked it and tumbled inside, her hair was plastered to her face and her shoes squelched with water. Great, she muttered, turning the key in the ignition. The radio came on automatically, the weather announcer's voice filling the small space. Flash flood warning remains in effect for Riverdale County until 7 p.m. Several accidents have already been reported on Highway 16, so please use extreme caution if you must travel. Rose adjusted her mirrors and pulled out of the parking lot. She'd driven this route hundreds of times and knew every curve of the road between school and home. 20 minutes tops, even with the rain. She'd be fine. Back at the sheriff's station, James Cooper was dealing with the chaos the sudden storm had brought. 3 fender benders in town, a downed tree on Elm Street, and now reports of flooding in the low-lying areas near the river. Miller and Hernandez are at the Johnston place helping them move livestock to higher ground, Donna reported from dispatch. Lou's directing traffic around that big tree, and the fire department's on their way with chainsaws. James nodded, studying. The map of Riverdale County spread out on his desk, mentally calculating resources and priorities. Where are Mercer and Dawson? They took a call about a stranded motorist out on Highway 16 near the county line. The radio crackled again with another accident report, this time at the intersection of Main and Poplar. James sighed and reached for his rain jacket. I'll take that one. Keep me updated on the flooding situation. As he headed for the door, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He expected it to be Rose, maybe asking for a ride home in this weather, but it was Dr. Washington instead. Sheriff Cooper, James answered, wedging the phone between his ear and shoulder, as he shrugged into his jacket. Sheriff, I wanted to give you a heads up. We're seeing a lot of weather-related injuries coming into the ER. I've called in extra staff, but with these road conditions, some are having trouble getting here. If you have any serious injuries, you might want to direct them to County Hospital, if it's closer. Appreciate the warning, Doc. So far, it's just been minor fender benders, but I'll keep that in mind. How's Rose? Dr. Washington asked. I know she usually stays late on Tuesdays for debate. The question sent an unexpected chill down James's spine. He hadn't thought about Rose driving home in this weather until now. She should be on her way home. I'll give her a call and make sure she's okay. Good idea. This storm came in faster and harder than anyone predicted. The highway can get treacherous. After hanging up, James tried Rose's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She was probably driving and had turned it off. He'd lectured her enough about not using her phone while behind the wheel. Still, he couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Out on Highway 16, Rose was gripping the steering wheel with both hands, leaning forward slightly as if that might help her see better through the wall of water cascading down her windshield. The wipers were working overtime, but barely making a difference. She'd slowed to about 30 miles an hour, and even that felt too fast in these conditions. A car appeared in her rearview mirror, coming up fast despite the weather. Its headlights seemed impossibly bright, reflecting off her mirrors and momentarily blinding her. Rose held steady, resisting the urge to speed up just because someone behind her was in a hurry. "Go around," she muttered as the car closed in, nearly riding her bumper now. "There's a whole other lane, you idiot." As if hearing her, the driver finally moved to pass. Rose exhaled in relief as the car pulled alongside her, a large pickup truck, she realized, riding much higher off the road than her little Honda. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion, though it couldn't have taken more than a few seconds. The truck hit a deep puddle as it passed, sending a wave of water up and over Rose's car. Her windshield went completely dark with water, just as the road curved slightly to the right. Blind and startled, Rose jerked the steering wheel, overcorrected, and felt her rear tires begin to slide on the slick pavement. Hydroplaning. The word flashed in her mind along with her father's instructions from when he'd first taught her to drive. Don't brake suddenly. Steer into the skid. But knowing what to do and being able to do it in the moment were entirely different things. Her car spun once, twice, the world outside a blur of gray and green. Then came a sickening sensation of weightlessness as the Honda left the road entirely, sliding down the gentle slope of the median. Rose had just enough time to think, "Dad's going to be so worried," before her world exploded in the scream of tearing metal and shattering glass. On the other side of the highway, a delivery truck driver named Roy Wilson saw the whole thing. He slammed on his brakes as the little blue Honda spun across the median and directly into his path. He managed to swerve enough that he didn't hit the car head-on, but the side impact was still devastating. Roy's truck skidded to a stop about 50 yards down the road. Shaking and disoriented, he fumbled for his phone and dialed 911. "There's been an accident on Highway 16, about 5 miles east of town," he told the dispatcher, his voice trembling. "A car lost control and crossed the median. I couldn't stop in time. Please hurry. I think the other driver is hurt bad." Donna's voice was steady and calm. "Help is on the way, sir. Can you see if the other driver is conscious?" Roy was already splashing through the rain toward the mangled Honda. The driver's side was crushed where his truck had hit it, the blue metal accordion folded against the frame. Through the spiderweb of cracks in the windshield, he could see a young woman slumped against the deployed airbag, her face streaked with blood. "She's not moving," Roy reported, his voice breaking. "There's a lot of blood. Please hurry." The first responders arrived 7 minutes later, an eternity to Roy, who stood in the pouring rain, helplessly watching the still form in the wrecked car. It was Deputies Mercer and Dawson who got there first, followed closely by an ambulance. "Stand back, sir," Mercer ordered, approaching the wreck with Dawson right behind him. Dawson peered into the car and swore under his breath. "It's the sheriff's kid." Mercer's head snapped around. "You sure?" "Positive. That's Rose Cooper." The paramedics pushed past them, working quickly to stabilize Rose's neck and assess her injuries. What they found wasn't good. Multiple broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and evidence of internal bleeding. Her pulse was rapid but weak, her breathing shallow and irregular. "We need to move fast," the lead paramedic, a woman named Tanya, said. "Radio ahead to Riverdale General. We've got a teenage, female critical condition, probable internal bleeding and head trauma. Tell them to prep for immediate surgery." As they carefully extracted Rose from the wreckage and transferred her to a backboard, her eyes fluttered open briefly. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain and the urgent voices around her. "You're going to be okay, honey," Tanya assured her, though her expression said otherwise. "We're taking you to the hospital. Your dad will meet us there." In the ambulance, Rose's condition deteriorated rapidly. Her blood pressure was dropping despite the fluids being pumped into her veins, and her oxygen levels were falling. Tanya worked feverishly, inserting a chest tube to reinflate Rose's collapsed lung while her partner drove with lights and sirens blaring. "Riverdale General, this is Unit 7, Tanya radioed ahead. "Patient is critical and unstable. ETA 4 minutes. We need a trauma team ready." At the hospital, Dr. Washington received the call and immediately began preparations. He reviewed the incoming vital signs, and recognized the severity of the situation. A young patient with these injuries needed immediate intervention. Prep or 2, he instructed the charge nurse. And call in Dr. Lin for backup. We'll likely need additional hands. It wasn't until he was scrubbing in that he heard the patient's name. Rose Cooper, the sheriff's daughter. His stomach tightened, but his hands remained steady. This was what he was trained for, to save lives when minutes counted. He would give Rose the same care he would give anyone else, but he couldn't deny that this case felt personal. He'd grown fond of the bright, curious teenager who asked such insightful questions during her hospital volunteering. We'll get you through this, Rose, he promised quietly as the nurse helped him into his surgical gown. Back at the accident scene, Deputy Dawson was on the radio to Sheriff Cooper, delivering the news no parent ever wants to hear. James, it's Scott. There's been an accident on Highway 16. A pause. It's Rose, Sheriff. They've taken her to Riverdale General. It looks bad. You should get there right away. Sheriff Cooper felt the world tilt beneath his feet. For a moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then training and instinct took over. I'm on my way, he managed to say before dropping the radio and running for his patrol car, lights already flashing as he pulled out of the station parking lot. As he sped toward the hospital, one thought kept repeating in his mind. Please don't take her too. Not like Linda, please. Not my little girl. He had no way of knowing that the greatest threat to Rose's life wasn't her injuries, as severe as they were. It was what would happen when the ambulance arrived at Riverdale General, and Deputies Mercer and Dawson got there first. The ambulance carrying Rose Cooper screamed into the emergency bay at Riverdale General Hospital, its tires sending up sprays of water as it came to a stop. Inside, paramedic Tanya was still working frantically to keep the sheriff's daughter alive. Rose's blood pressure had dropped dangerously low, and she'd lost consciousness again during the short drive. Female 17 car accident victim, Tanya reported as the back doors swung open and hospital staff rushed to help transfer the gurney. Multiple broken ribs, collapsed right lung, probable internal bleeding, BP 80/40 and dropping. We've given 2 units of fluid, but she's not stabilizing. Dr. Washington was waiting with his trauma team, his face a mask of professional calm that betrayed none of the worry he felt inside. This wasn't just another patient. This was Rose, bright, curious Rose, who reminded him of his own daughter, back in Chicago. But he couldn't think about that now. He needed to be a surgeon first, a friend second. Get her into Trauma 1, he ordered, already assessing Rose's injuries as they wheeled her in. I need a full trauma panel, type and cross. For 4 units and get ultrasound in here, stat. Let's move, people. The trauma room burst into controlled chaos as nurses cut away Rose's wet clothes, attached monitors, and drew blood samples. Dr. Washington performed a quick examination, his experienced hands gentle but thorough as he felt for injuries. There's rigidity in the abdomen, he noted, his concern deepening. And decreased breath sounds on the right. Let's get that chest tube in and prepare for exploratory surgery. She's bleeding internally. Just as the ultrasound technician arrived, confirming Dr. Washington's suspicions of blood in Rose's abdomen, 2 more figures pushed through the trauma room doors. Deputies Mercer and Dawson, both still in their rain-soaked uniforms, badges prominently displayed. How is she? Dawson asked, his voice loud in the focused quiet of medical professionals at work. Dr. Washington barely glanced up. Critical. I need to get her to surgery immediately. Please wait outside. Mercer stepped closer, inserting himself between the doctor and the gurney. We need to make sure the sheriff's daughter gets the best care possible. That's exactly what I'm providing, Dr. Washington replied evenly, trying to move past him. Every second counts here. Mercer didn't budge. His eyes narrowed as he looked at Dr. Washington, then at the rest of the trauma team, a mix of races and backgrounds that reflected the changing face of Riverdale over the past decade. I think Dr. Brennan should handle this case, Mercer announced. He's been here longer. The sheriff would want his daughter treated by someone with more local experience. The trauma room went quiet except for the beeping of Rose's heart monitor, a sound that was becoming more rapid and irregular with each passing moment. Dr. Washington took a deep breath. Deputy, Dr. Brennan is an excellent orthopedic surgeon, but he's not trained in trauma surgery. Rose needs immediate treatment for internal bleeding, which is my specialty. Now please step aside so I can do my job." "You heard the man." A nurse named Helen spoke up. She was in her 60s, had worked at Riverdale General for over 30 years, and didn't suffer fools gladly. "This girl needs surgery now." Dawson put his hand on his partner's shoulder. For a moment, it seemed like he might actually see reason. Then he shook his head. "No, Frank's right. We should wait for Dr. Brennan. The sheriff would want someone he knows and trusts operating on his daughter." Dr. Lynn, who had been setting up for the chest tube, looked up in disbelief. "That's ridiculous. Dr. Washington is the trauma specialist on call. He's performed this exact procedure hundreds of times. And I'm saying we should wait," Mercer insisted, his voice hardening. "Sheriff Cooper is a personal friend and I know what he'd want." The hospital administrator, Mr. Phillips, had been called to the emergency department when the situation began, escalating. He pushed through the doors just in time to hear Mercer's declaration. "What's going on here?" he asked, looking from the deputies to the medical team. "These officers are preventing us from taking a critical patient to surgery," Dr. Washington explained, struggling to keep his voice calm. "Every minute we delay reduces her chances of survival." Phillips glanced nervously at the deputies, then at Rose's pale form on the gurney. Hospital politics were always delicate in a small town like Riverdale, where the sheriff's department held considerable influence. The hospital relied on county funding, and crossing the wrong people could have consequences. "Perhaps we should call Dr. Brennan," Phillips suggested weakly. "Just to be safe." Dr. Washington stared at him in shock. "She doesn't have time for this. Look at her vitals. She's bleeding out while we stand here talking." Rose's monitor gave an ominous beep as her blood pressure dropped further. The nurse adjusting her IV looked up in alarm. "We're losing her," she warned. Dr. Washington moved toward the gurney again, only to find Dawson physically blocking his path. "Step back, doctor," Dawson said, one hand moving to rest on his holstered weapon, not drawing it but making the implied threat clear. The medical staff exchanged horrified glances. This had gone beyond hospital politics into something far uglier. "This is about her being the sheriff's daughter or about me being black?" Dr. Washington asked quietly, looking Dawson directly in the eye. The deputy didn't flinch. "This is about doing what's right for Rose." "Then let me save her life," Dr. Washington pleaded. Outside in the hospital corridor, Sheriff James Cooper burst through the emergency department doors, his uniform soaked from the rain, his face gray with fear. He'd driven through the storm with lights and sirens, breaking every speed limit, desperate to reach his daughter. "Where is she?" he demanded of the first nurse he saw. "My daughter, Rose Cooper, she was in an accident." "Trauma 1, the nurse pointed. "But Sheriff, there's some kind of situation." James didn't wait to hear more. He pushed past her, following. "The signs to Trauma 1. He could hear raised voices before he even reached the room, Mercer's distinctive drawl cutting through the others. Inside the trauma room, the standoff continued. Dr. Washington had backed away from Dawson but was still arguing with Phillips. "Call security if you have to," he was saying. "But I'm not going to stand here and watch this girl die because of prejudice disguised as concern." "You're out of line, Doctor," Mercer snapped. "This isn't about—" The doors swung open with such force they banged against the walls. Sheriff Cooper stood there taking in the scene before him, his deputies facing off against the medical team, and his daughter, deathly pale on the gurney between them. "What the hell is going on here?" he roared. Everyone started talking at once, but it was the steady beep 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 of Rose's heart monitor that cut through the chaos, reminding James what was truly important. "Sheriff," Dr. Washington said, seizing the moment of quiet. "Rose has internal bleeding and needs immediate surgery. I'm ready to operate, but your deputies have been preventing me from taking her to the OR." James stared at him, then at Mercer and Dawson. "Is that true?" Mercer stepped forward, his expression earnest. "James, we just thought you'd want someone you know better looking after Rose." "Dr. Brennan is an orthopedic surgeon," Dr. Washington interrupted, "not a trauma specialist." James looked at his daughter, then at the monitors displaying her failing vital signs. Her face was so pale, so still, just like Linda's had been in those final days. He couldn't lose Rose, too. "Where's Brennan now?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Dr. Lynn answered. "He's across town at his clinic. He's been called, but it will take him at least 20 minutes to get here in this weather." "And if we wait?" James asked, already knowing the answer. Dr. Washington met his gaze directly. "If we wait, she dies. It's that simple, Sheriff." James felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. For one terrible moment, he was paralyzed by the enormity of the situation. Then he looked at his deputies, men he had trusted, men he had defended against complaints, men he had considered friends, and suddenly saw them clearly for the first time. "Get out of the way," he ordered, his voice deadly quiet. "Now." Dawson blinked in surprise. "Sheriff, we were just—" "I said move," James shouted, shoving past them to his daughter's side. He took her limp hand in his, squeezing it gently. "Do whatever you need to do, Doctor. Save my little girl." Dr. Washington nodded once, already turning to the team. "Let's move her to OR2 now. Dr. Lynn, you're with me. Helen, call up and tell them we're on our way." As they rushed Rose toward the elevator, James followed as far as he could. At the doors to the surgical suite, Dr. Washington paused. "I'll do everything I can," he promised. James nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. As the doors closed between them, he found himself praying for the first time since Linda's funeral. Then he turned, his grief momentarily hardening into rage as he faced Mercer and Dawson, who had followed at a distance. "My office tomorrow morning. Both of you," he said, his voice like ice. "For now, get out of my sight before I do something I'll regret." The deputies retreated, muttering excuses that James didn't bother to hear. He collapsed into a chair in the surgical waiting room, his head in his hands, the full weight of what had happened finally hitting him. How many minutes had been wasted? How much precious blood had Rose lost while people argued over who should save her? And how had he been so blind to the poison in his own department? A gentle hand on his shoulder startled him. It was Helen, the nurse from the trauma room. "Dr. Washington is the best there is," she told him quietly. "If anyone can save her, he can." "How long?" James asked. How long were they blocking him from helping her? Helen hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "About 20 minutes from when she arrived." 20 minutes. In trauma medicine, 20 minutes could mean the difference between life and death. James closed his eyes, feeling sick. "Why didn't anyone call me?" "They said they were acting on your behalf," Helen explained. "Said you'd want Dr. Brennan. By the time anyone thought to question them, things had already escalated." James shook, his head, his hands clenching into fists. "I never said anything like that, never would have." Helen patted his shoulder again. "I know that, Sheriff. Most of us knew that. But when a man with a gun starts throwing his weight around..." She didn't need to finish the thought. James understood all too well the power his deputies had wielded, power he had given them through his badge and his trust. "Will she make it?" he asked, the question barely audible. Helen's kind face crumpled slightly. "I don't know, Sheriff. She lost a lot of blood, but she's young and strong, and she's got the best doctor in there with her. The best doctor who had been prevented from helping her when she needed it most." The irony was bitter in James's mouth. As he settled in to wait, surrounded by the antiseptic smell of the hospital and the weight of his own culpability. Hours crawled by in the surgical waiting room. Sheriff James Cooper sat with his head bowed, sometimes praying, sometimes just trying to breathe through the crushing weight of fear. The rain continued to beat against the windows, matching the storm raging inside him. Nurse Helen had brought him coffee that sat untouched beside him. Other officers had come by. Lou and Hernandez stayed the longest, sitting quietly with him, offering silent support. Neither Mercer nor Dawson had dared to show their faces, which was probably for the best. James wasn't sure he could look at them without losing what little composure he had left. Around hour 3, Dr. Brennan arrived, having finally made it through the flooded roads. The older surgeon took one look at James's face and sat down heavily beside him. "I just heard what happened," he said quietly. "James, I never would have gone along with that nonsense. You know that, right?" James nodded slightly. Dr. Brennan had been their family doctor for years, had treated Rose for everything from chicken pox to a broken wrist when she fell off her bike at 10. He was a good man, a good doctor within his field. "Is she going to make it?" James asked, his voice rough from disuse. Dr. Brennan sighed. "Washington is the best trauma surgeon I've ever worked with. If anyone can pull her through, it's him. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I can give. Her injuries were severe and there was significant delay in treatment." He hesitated. "James, I need to ask. Those deputies claimed they were acting on your authority." James's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with anger. "I never said anything like that, never would have." "I didn't think so," Dr. Brennan said softly. "What are you going to do about them?" Before James could answer, the doors to the surgical suite opened, and Dr. Washington emerged, still in his surgical gown with a cap covering his hair. His face looked drawn, exhausted. There was blood on the gown, Rose's blood. James stood up so quickly he felt dizzy. "Doctor?" Dr. Washington crossed to him, pulling off his surgical cap. "Sheriff Cooper. James. We did everything we could." The world seemed to tilt sideways. James reached out blindly, gripping the back of a chair to stay upright. "Is she—" He couldn't finish the question. "She's alive," Dr. Washington said quickly, seeing the panic in James's eyes. "But I need to be honest with you, she's in critical condition. The internal bleeding was extensive, her spleen was ruptured and had to be removed. There was damage to her liver that we repaired. The collapsed lung is reinflated and we've set the broken ribs." "But?" James prompted, hearing the unspoken word hanging in the air between them. Dr. Washington met his gaze directly. "But she lost a tremendous amount of blood before and during surgery, and there was a period when her heart stopped on the table." James felt his own heart clench in his chest. "How long?" 2 minutes and 17 seconds, Dr. Washington replied precisely. "We got her back, but—" He hesitated. "Tell me everything," James said. "I need to know." Dr. Washington nodded, respecting the request. "When the heart stops, blood flow to the brain ceases. After about 4 to 6 minutes without oxygen, brain damage becomes likely. We're within that window, but it's impossible to know yet if there's been any permanent damage." James sank back into his chair, trying to process this. His daughter was alive but might have brain damage, because help had been delayed, because his own deputies had interfered with her care. "Can I see her?" he asked. "Finally. She's in recovery now. Once she's stable enough, we'll move her to the ICU. You can see her then, though she's heavily sedated and won't be conscious." James nodded numbly. "Thank you. For everything you did. For fighting for her." Dr. Washington's expression softened, slightly. "She's a special young woman. I've enjoyed our conversations about medicine. She has had a promising future ahead of her." The slip into past tense wasn't lost on James. "You don't think she'll recover?" Dr. Washington chose his words carefully. "I believe in being honest with families. Rose's condition is extremely serious. The next 24 to 48 hours will be critical. If she makes it through that period, we'll have a better idea of her prognosis." "If," James repeated, the tiny word like a knife to his heart. "I'm not giving up on her," Dr. Washington assured him. "And neither should you. But you deserve the truth about what we're facing." James appreciated the honesty, even as it terrified him. He'd seen enough doctors over the years, especially during Linda's illness, to know when they were sugarcoating bad news. "The delay in treatment," he began, then had to stop and clear his throat. How much did it matter?" Dr. Washington's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "In trauma care, we talk about the golden hour, the first 60 minutes after injury when treatment is most effective. Every minute counts, Sheriff. I can't quantify exactly how much difference 20 minutes made in Rose's case, but it wasn't helpful. James finished for him. No, Dr. Washington agreed quietly. It wasn't helpful. They were interrupted by a nurse coming to update Dr. Washington on Rose's vitals. As he stepped away to consult with her, Dr. Brennan moved closer to James. "What can I do?" he asked simply. James shook his head. "Just keep an eye on Rose if you can. I trust you." "Of course." Dr. Brennan hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I've worked alongside Washington for nearly a year now. He's brilliant, James. Truly gifted. If I ever needed surgery myself, he'd be my first choice." The words were meant to be comforting, but they only drove home how tragically misguided the deputy's actions had been. The best doctor had been right there, ready to help, and they had blocked him based on nothing but the color of his skin. 3 more hours passed before Rose was moved to the ICU. James was finally allowed to see her, though the nurse warned him to prepare himself. Nothing could have prepared him for the sight of his vibrant, talkative daughter lying motionless in the hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines. Tubes and wires seemed to be connected to every part of her. A ventilator breathed for her, making her chest rise and fall in an unnatural rhythm. Her face was swollen and bruised, nearly unrecognizable. "Oh, Rosie," he whispered, carefully taking her hand between both of his. Her skin felt cool to the touch, nothing like her usual warmth. "I'm here, sweetheart. Dad's right here." A nurse came in to check Rose's vitals and adjust her medications. "Talk to her," she encouraged James. "We don't know for sure, but many people believe patients can hear even when they're unconscious." When they were alone again, James pulled a chair close to Rose's bedside and began to speak, his voice low and steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "Remember that camping trip when you were 8? When it rained for 3 days straight and we had to huddle in that tiny tent playing card games? You said it was still the best vacation ever because we saw that family of deer on the last morning." He squeezed her hand gently. "You've always found the good in bad situations, Rosie. You get that from your mom. I need you to do that now. I need you to find your way back from wherever you are." His voice broke on the last words. The thought of losing Rose was unbearable. She was all he had left. His whole world. The night stretched on endlessly. James refused to leave Rose's side, even when the nurses suggested he get some rest. Dr. Washington came by several times to check on her, his face growing more concerned with each visit. Around 3 a.m., alarms suddenly blared from the monitors. Rose's blood pressure was plummeting and her oxygen levels were dropping despite the ventilator. Dr. Washington and a team of nurses rushed in, quickly assessing the situation. "She's bleeding again," Dr. Washington said grimly. "We need to get her back to the OR now." Everything happened in a blur after that. Rose was whisked away, leaving James standing alone in the empty ICU room, the echo of the alarm still ringing in his ears. This time, the wait was even more excruciating. James paced the surgical waiting room, unable to sit still, unable to quiet his racing thoughts. What if these were Rose's final hours? What if he never got to speak to her again, to tell her how proud he was of her, how much he loved her? And mixed with the fear was a growing rage at Mercer and Dawson. Their actions might have cost Rose her life. How many other lives had they impacted with their prejudice? How many times had James looked the other way, making excuses or pretending not to notice? Dawn was breaking when Dr. Washington finally appeared again. One look at his face told James everything. "No," James whispered, shaking his head in denial. "No, please." Dr. Washington's eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion and something else. Unshed tears. "I'm so sorry, Sheriff. We did everything possible. She had developed a condition called DIC, disseminated intravascular coagulation. It's when the blood's clotting system goes into overdrive, then fails. We couldn't stop the bleeding." "She's gone?" James asked, though he already knew the answer. Dr. Washington nodded once. "She passed about 20 minutes ago. We continued resuscitation efforts, but She was too badly injured. Her heart couldn't take the strain. James stood perfectly still, feeling as if he might shatter if he moved even an inch. The world around him seemed distant and muffled, as if he were underwater. Would she have lived? He asked finally, his voice barely audible. If they hadn't delayed her treatment, would my daughter be alive right now? Dr. Washington looked at him for a long moment, weighing honesty against compassion. I believe she would have had a significantly better chance, yes. The initial delay allowed the bleeding to continue unchecked for too long. It set off a cascade of complications that might have been avoided with immediate intervention. The confirmation hit James like a physical blow. His knees buckled and he sank to the floor, a sound escaping him that was barely human. The raw, primal cry of a parent who has lost a child. Dr. Washington knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. No words were spoken. None would have been adequate in that moment. When James finally looked up, his eyes were dry but filled with a terrible clarity. "I want to see her," he said. "Of course," Dr. Washington replied, helping him to his feet. "Take all the time you need." As they walked toward the room where Rose's body lay, James felt something hardening inside him, a resolve born of grief and rage and guilt. "Those deputies," he said. "Mercer and Dawson, they're finished in my department and they're going to answer for what they've done." Dr. Washington glanced at him. "It won't bring her back." "No," James agreed, his voice steady now despite the pain crushing his chest. "Nothing will bring her back. But it might stop this from happening to someone else's child." He paused outside the door to Rose's room, gathering his strength for what lay ahead. "My wife used to say that change never comes easy," he told Dr. Washington. "But sometimes it comes whether we're ready or not. And how we respond to it defines who we are." With that, he pushed open the door to say goodbye to his daughter, and to the man he had been until this moment. The day they buried Rose was surprisingly bright and clear, as if the skies had exhausted all their tears during the storm that took her life. Hundreds of people from Riverdale gathered at the small cemetery on the hill, the same place where James had laid his wife to rest 5 years earlier. Now, unthinkably, he was burying his daughter beside her mother. James stood ramrod straight in his dress uniform, his face a mask of stone as he accepted condolences from what seemed like the entire town. Teachers from Rose's school spoke of her brilliance and kindness. Classmates shared tearful memories. Dr. Brennan talked about watching her grow from a curious little girl into a compassionate young woman with dreams of healing others. Dr. Washington came too, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. James spotted him and made his way over after the service. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. Dr. Washington nodded. "I had to pay my respects. Rose was special." They stood in silence for a moment, both men looking at the fresh grave covered in flowers. "The investigation starts tomorrow," James said finally. "Internal Affairs is sending someone from the county. I've already given my statement about what happened at the hospital." "I've given mine as well," Dr. Washington replied, "as have several of the hospital staff." James took a deep breath. "I want you to know I'm going to see this through, whatever it takes." "It won't be easy," Dr. Washington warned. "Mercer and Dawson have friends in the department. There will be people who make excuses for them, who try to minimize what happened." "Let them try," James said, and there was something dangerous in his quiet tone. "My daughter is dead because of their prejudice. Nothing will change that. But I will make damn sure they're held accountable." 2 weeks later, Deputies Frank Mercer and Scott Dawson sat stone-faced in the sheriff's office as James formally placed them under arrest for criminal negligence resulting in death. The internal investigation had been thorough and damning, uncovering a pattern of discriminatory behavior that went far beyond the incident at the hospital. "You can't be serious," Mercer sputtered as James read them their rights. "James, we've known each other for 15 years. We were just trying to look out for Rose." "By preventing the most qualified doctor from treating her?" James asked coldly. "The evidence says otherwise, Frank. The things you said to the hospital staff, the comments you've made about Dr. Washington since he arrived in town, it all paints a pretty clear picture." This is ridiculous, Dawson protested. You're throwing away our careers over one mistake? James felt a surge of rage so powerful it momentarily blinded him. When he could speak again, his voice was dangerously quiet. One mistake? My daughter is dead. She was 17 years old. She wanted to be a doctor. Now she's in the ground and you have the nerve to call it one mistake? Neither deputy had a response to that. James motioned to Officers Liu and Hernandez, who had been waiting outside. Take them to county lockup, he ordered. I have arranged for their processing there to avoid any appearance of conflict of interest. Dasgau. The disgraced deputies were led away. James sat heavily behind his desk, looking at the framed photo of Rose in her debate team uniform. The weight of what he had just done, arresting two men he had worked alongside for years, pressed down on him. But beneath that weight was the heavier burden of knowing he should have acted sooner. How many warning signs had he ignored? How many racist comments had he let slide in the name of workplace harmony?